and is not meant to represent the views of my employer or any of my professional affiliations. Earlier this year, the President issued an executive order targeting one of the nation's largest and most influential law firms, Perkins Coie. Why target this law firm? Well, it had been involved in defending the results of the 2020 presidential election, and it also had litigated numerous voting rights cases. The executive order characterized the law firm as dishonest and dangerous, and asserted that it engaged in unlawful discrimination due to its commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. The order would suspend security clearances for the firm's lawyers, essentially canceling the opportunity to represent any client with matters before the federal government. Many other large law firms, faced with similar demands, struck deals with the administration. Perkins Coie sued. At the conclusion of the trial process in May, United States District Judge Beryl Howell declared the executive order unconstitutional. She began her opinion by suggesting that the president's action drew from a playbook as old as Shakespeare. Judge Howell wrote, "The first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers." Quoting, of course, from Shakespeare's Henry VI, Part 2. Now, this phrase is often said as a way to denigrate lawyers. But that line in the play was uttered by Dick the Butcher, a murderous villain who is helping Jack Cade in his plot to overthrow the government of King Henry and to assume power himself. Upon hearing the suggestion, Jack Cade immediately builds it into his rebel plan. "Away with him," he motions to an educated law clerk who can make obligations and write in courthand. Judge Howell continued in her opinion, "Eliminating lawyers as the guardian of rule of law removes a major impediment to the path to more power." Let's consider Judge Howell's assertion that lawyers serve as the guardians of the rule of law. What is the rule of law? According to Black's Law Dictionary, the rule of law is the legal principle that states that nobody, not even a king, a president, or a prime minister, is above the law. Black's dictionary points to three alternatives to the rule of law. One, the divine right of kings, something that the founders of our constitutional republic rebelled against and viewed as tyranny. Two, the rule of man, a system in government in which the rule of law is absent, and when people, rather than laws, govern society. Think Hitler's Third Reich and Stalin's Soviet Union. Three, ochlocracy, or mob rule, in which any rule of law becomes subverted to the demands of the populace. Reading the news every day, it would be easy for us to become despondent, to assume that the rule of law is on its last legs, and that the country is moving rapidly toward one of these terrible alternate regimes. I have days when I feel just that. And yet, almost weekly, we see courts push back hard on this administration. Now, to be sure, not every court and every judge is reaching decisions that we might find just or fair, and the Supreme Court has issued a number of decisions that are especially alarming. However, there have been many rulings that might give us, perhaps, a bit of hope that we can withstand the present dangers. Just last weekend, the New York Times noted in its opinion section that there have been over 400 lawsuits filed against the administration so far this year, and that dozens and dozens of federal judges appointed by both Democratic and Republican presidents alike, including the current president, have ruled decisively against this administration. So if there are times when you end up feeling hopeless about the current condition of our country, I recommend some reading. Believe it or not, there are excellent judicial opinions and orders that may raise your spirit. Now, we've heard from Judge Howell. Let's next consider a few opinions issued in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was sent to a notorious prison in El Salvador due to what the government called an administrative error. In April, the Supreme Court issued an order that read in part, "The United States acknowledges that Abrego Garcia was subject to a withholding order forbidding his removal to El Salvador, and that the removal was therefore illegal." The Supreme Court further indicated that the lower court's order properly requires the government to facilitate his release from custody in El Salvador and to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been if he had not been improperly removed. The U.S. District Judge took back up the case and proceeded to set terms for how the government should move forward, including a demand that it show in open court just what steps it was taking to return Mr. Abrego Garcia. The administration took umbrage with the judge's effort to force it to comply and appealed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. In a remarkable decision, Judge Harvey Weinstein III, appointed to the Fourth Circuit in 1984 by President Ronald Reagan, and long considered to be a very conservative jurist, wrote the following: "It is difficult, in some cases, to get to the very heart of the matter. But in this case, it is not hard at all. The government is asserting a right to stash away residents of this country in foreign prisons without the semblance of due process that is the foundation of our constitutional order. Further, it claims in essence that because it has rid itself of custody, that there is nothing that can be done. This should be shocking, not only to judges, but to the intuitive sense of liberty that Americans far removed from courthouses still hold dear." Before signing the order, Judge Wilkinson wrote, as judges often do, "It is so ordered." Powerful words in the context of a righteous decision. Now, this government is nothing but relentless, and it went back to the Fourth Circuit to ask the court that it stay its opinion or to put it on hold while it appealed the matter to the Supreme Court. This time, writing for the appellate court, was Judge Stephanie Thacker. She wrote, "The United States government has no legal authority to snatch a person who is lawfully present in the United States off the street and remove him from the country without due process." The court denied the request to stay its decision, and Judge Thacker concluded, once again, "It is so ordered." Of course, we know this case continues because although Mr. Abrego Garcia was finally returned to the United States, he remains criminally charged and detained and is once again under the threat of deportation. Now, the most significant test for the rule of law will be if the government just refuses to follow what is so ordered and thumbs its nose at the government. Some argue that this has already happened, and I think there may be good evidence to support that. One very recent example is a lawsuit filed by the Florida Immigrant Coalition over a new state law that would make it a crime for undocumented immigrants to enter Florida after evading immigration inspection. U.S. District Judge Kathleen Williams quickly concluded that the law was very likely unconstitutional and issued a temporary restraining order. Further, she ordered the state attorney general to inform all law enforcement agencies that they must not enforce the new law. The attorney general did initially write to law enforcement agencies to inform them of the judge's order, but a few days later, he wrote to them again. This time, he told law enforcement that although he had complied with Judge Williams' order by telling them not to enforce, quote, "I cannot prevent you from enforcing the law. It is my view that no lawful, legitimate order currently impedes your agencies from continuing to enforce." He later posted videos on social media in which he stated, "I am not going to rubber stamp her order. I am not going to direct law enforcement to stand down. I will not bow down." Judge Williams, taking note of the Attorney General's second message to law enforcement and his public statements, quickly scheduled a hearing and then found him in civil contempt. The judge wrote, "Over a century ago, author Lewis Carroll guided readers through the looking glass to the adventures there, and we encounter a character who boasts of his mastery of words. When I use a word, Humpty Dumpty said, in rather a scornful tone, it means just what I choose it to mean, nothing, neither more nor less." "The question is," said Alice, "whether you can make words mean so many different things." The judge continued, "The answer then, as now, is no. Litigants cannot change the plain meaning of words as it suits them, especially when conveying a court's clear and unambiguous order. Fidelity to the rule of law can have no other meaning." In his book on tyranny, Yale history professor Timothy Snyder offers 20 lessons from the 20th century on how to avoid the establishment of tyrannical rule. One of Professor Snyder's lessons is, do not obey in advance. History shows that during the lead-up period, before authoritarian regimes really took hold, citizens had freely given them power by thinking in advance about what the government might want and then offering them that without even being asked. This happened in the 1930s when Austrian citizens demonstrated anticipatory obedience. Under the threat of annexation by Germany, citizens helped scrub any evidence of an independent Austrian nation and participated in theft and worse against Austrian Jews. This type of anticipatory obedience is happening all around us today in our institutions, in our corporations, in our universities, and it must stop. The epigraph to Professor Snyder's book, it's on page 3, is from Leszek Kolakowski, a Polish philosopher. It reads quite simply, "In politics, being deceived is no excuse. We must remain vigilant about understanding the truth of what is happening in our politics, even when doing so becomes exhausting. Because being deceived is no excuse for an unthinkable outcome. In Unitarian Universalism, our fifth principle affirms the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process in our congregations and in society at large. If the government can threaten to take away a university's not-for-profit tax status because it teaches disfavored subjects in its classrooms, it is not a stretch to imagine this government going after liberal religion. We must remain vigilant. As Kathy mentioned earlier, I've been affiliated with a law school just down the road here for 20 years now. I am not a lawyer, and that surprises many because of the work that I do, but I have spent over 30 years in legal education alongside brilliant law professors, legal clinicians, and law students who want to change the world. Last year, Duke celebrated its centennial. In founding the university, J.B. Duke specifically named lawyers along with preachers, teachers, and physicians as members of professions who should be educated at Duke, because in his words, they can do most to uplift mankind. Now, it may be easy to understand how preachers, teachers, and physicians can uplift humanity, but I hope by the examples I've offered this morning, we can acknowledge that smart, fearless lawyers and judges can do the same. Of course, in each of those professions cited by J.B. Duke, there are those who raise up and those who tear down. There is a Thurgood Marshall, and there is a Rudy Giuliani. There is a Martin Luther King Jr. and a Jerry Falwell. But the fact that there are those who do serious harm should not keep us from celebrating and supporting those who continue to do their best to uplift humanity. It is my hope and prayer this morning that all of us who travel these perilous times turn to one another in community for support, to educate ourselves and others, and to encourage action. For if we do these things, I can confidently predict that we will deepen our belief that all beings on this planet have an equal claim to life, liberty, and justice, that we will not give up on the never-ending search for truth, and that on the other side of these crises, we will have prevailed, holding tight still to the values we bring with us here this morning: optimism, a sense of humor, and a sense of duty, and a passion for justice. It is so ordered.